Okay, so now we're gonna see that how can we create a virtual machine in Azure. So it's pretty simple. As you see, I'm already logged on to my Microsoft Azure account. Before we can do anything with Microsoft Azure, we need to make sure that we are logged in using registered credentials and we have an active subscription. There are different kinds of subscriptions that you can buy. It could be educational, it could be commercial, it could be for your own business or personal use, depending upon what your requirement is. So I have an active subscription that's for Azure for Students, and it's tied to my Georgia Tech account. So that's the one that I'll be using. And once you are logged in, this is the landing page that you see. And there's a bunch of ways that you can navigate to the virtual machine section. But since it's such a commonly used Azure service, we can see it's right there in the commonly used services section. So if we point our pointer to the icon, it just expands into this menu or a pop-up or a splash screen, which has a bunch of options. I mean, namely, you can see all of your virtual machines that you may already have, or you can even create a new one. So in this case, we would click on Create. And when we click on Create, we get a bunch of options that are basically different kind of configurations that you would want for a machine. So now another concept that Azure has is that all of your resources, basically resources are any service components that you create. And so as a rule of thumb, they need all to be grouped under a resource group of some sort for easy management and correlation with other Azure services. So either you can create a resource group in advance, or you can even create it on the fly while you're trying to spin up a machine. So let's just see if we can create it on the go. So these are some of the mandatory options, the ones that have asterisks against them. So the first one is subscription. Clearly, I have an active subscription, which is selected by default. There are multiple resource groups that are available to me. I mean, the one is default resource group and the second one is demo that I created yesterday. So I could use the same, or I could create a new one if I want to. If I want to create a new one, I can click on create new and just give the resource group a name. So for the time being, I'm just gonna stick to my existing resource group called demo, and I could just give it like a name. I think underscores are not permitted. It's hyphen numbers and alphabets that are permitted to name a virtual machine. So let's just go with demo machine 1. We can see that the name was accepted with a green check mark right there. Then we select the region that we want it to be. I'll leave it the default, which is US East. For the time being, I'm not selecting any redundancy because, again, this is a all the features do have a price attached to it, so we like to keep it to a bare minimum so that we don't run out of our Azure credits. And but yeah, if it's a proper deployment that you're trying to do for a major activity or a project or a production environment, you would need to select the availability zones accordingly. And what kind of OS we want, let's just go with Red Hat Linux Enterprise version 8.2, and we'll check the size of the machines that are available, and basically we can go with whatever our requirement is. And in my case, I would just filter it out on the basis of the lowest cost, and it just happens to be $3.80 a month. So let's just select that because it's a demo machine, which I'll probably get rid of. Now, the further options would be to specify an SSH public key, which of course, I'm sure it's easy to understand that it facilitates communication from external and internal networks. And you can specify a default username. I'll just let it be the way it is. Instead of password, I'll just give SSH public key, and the key pair name, it's automatically generated. I'll leave it to what it is. And public inbound ports, this is if you want to connect from an external network, which in most cases you would want if you're not just working in Azure. Like, so for testing purposes, you could enable it, and I'll leave it the way it is. We can move forward. This gives us the ability to select disk. I'll just select standard HDD. Again, it's all completely based on your requirement. You can choose standard or premium or whatever, and the pricing would go up according to that. And encryption would be default again. I'll just go to networking. I don't think I'm going to change anything there either. So it's just going to assign a subnet and an IP for the machine automatically. It's for demo purposes, we'll just leave everything unless and until we're doing something complex and we want a certain kind of network configuration, then we may end up modifying these. Again, you have the option of load balancing as well that you can make use of. It's giving us a bunch of management options, what we want to do with this machine in terms of management. Do we want auto shutdown, backups, site recovery? I'm not going to select any of those things. Boot diagnostics, I can disable it for quicker deployment, but it says that it is available as part of my subscription. So if I want to use that, I could. Advanced is if you want to use any extension or pass in a post deployment script to run on the machine or something like that, that could all be specified here. If we want to specify host groups or proximity placement groups, we can do that too. Tags again is for identification purposes. I'm not going to do that. Lastly, we go to review and create. It takes a moment for Azure to do its validation. As you can see, we have a validation passed here, and the machine cost that it would cost us to run this virtual machine is showing up, and a brief summary of the options that we've selected, and then we just review everything. And once we are finalized, we're happy with what we see, we just click on create, and we get a pop-up which says a new key pair would be generated for this machine, and for best case scenario you want to download and save it because it only can be downloaded once the machine is created. You won't not be able to have access to this. So that's done, and after that we can see that the deployment is in progress. So it's a multi-staged process, and it's gonna take a few minutes, so I'll probably be in mute. Okay, so as we see that the deployment is complete and our machine has been created, we get a notification in the notification bar as well. And just to check if everything looks okay or not, we go to our virtual machine resource by clicking on go to resource. And there we have it. I mean, the machine is started, it's up and running, as you can see in the status, and that's the public IP for the machine, and that's the private IP. So if we want to connect to it from an internal network, this is the IP that we'll be using, and from an external network outside of Azure, this is the IP that we'll be using. And of course, the key pair that we've downloaded right here, we would need to extract the private key for that and pass it as we try to build up our SSH connectivity. And yeah, there's a bunch of options for connecting: SSH, RDP, and Bastion. If we just look at SSH, it gives you a few options and a sample command that you would need to run in order to connect to it. As I said, you need to pass the private key with the I flag on your SSH command, and you should be good to go. So If we go to our home, there we see our demo machine shows up in our recently created resources as well. So yeah, that's a fairly easy and quick way on how you can create all kinds of virtual machines using Microsoft Azure.